it.
So here we are starting on chapter 13, the inevitable reaction is the title of it. And I'll just get us rolling for a few minutes. After the 7th of March, 1928, we know the spectacular demonstration of love had ceased at Mehrabad. Hence, the atmosphere naturally became very dull, and Mayor Ashram looked what a worldly institution of its kind would do to a spiritually minded person. For all its fine surroundings, tip-top arrangements, and comforting facilities, besides the occasional sidelights and glimpses of that which is unfelt and unseen through the external medium of the body that the select few got now and then from the master during the full blaze of the love season had also ceased, although in their little hearts the fire of love went on smoldering silently but surely. Of course, these boys were often explained to the point of almost satisfactory conviction the reasons as to why a gap for a certain period was quite necessary pending the arrival of the right moment. Yet the agony in their hearts often during this gap used to prove too much for them to bear. Hence, impatience and distraction ruled supreme. Many of them, at times, used to go to the length of biting themselves, tearing their clothes, crying loudly, running away, refusing to come near the master, and even directly disobeying him. The writer remembers witnessing a touching incident in this connection. Once, during this period, one of the most intelligent and at the same time deeply affected, a Hindu boy of about 16 named Lobaji, was brought before the master by his attendant after getting him back from a random escapade. The master patted him and once again tried to convey to him to wait for some time for getting his internal thirst quenched. After lengthy explanations, Lobaji could blurt out but one word in reply to the master. And it was a very powerful no. Not only did he utter this negation, but gave such a shake to his head at the time, as if he meant to make every part of his body to produce an echo of his emphatic no. All right, don't wait so long. I will give you next week, conveyed the master. But again, Lobaji's head shook sideways without even bringing out that piquant no. Well, if you are so very keen, be sure to get the sight tomorrow. Never fear, I will give it to you for a certainty. Again conveyed the master through his fast-moving fingers on the alphabet card. And this time, Lohaji's sphinx-like silence was broken. I want the sight today, now, at this moment, were the simple but emotional words that came from his twitching lips. Joyce Carlson Are you reading today? Unmute and continue, please.
Okay. Do I know when I should stop? Is it every
I'll
paragraph?
let you know. Yeah,
Okay, good.
about
Thank
10 minutes from now.
oh, oh boy. Even the ideal of the institution, the hero, could not keep his fine record of obedience untarnished during this reactionary period, and was marked disobeying and behaving rudely with the master on more than one occasion. But still, even in his disobedience, Ali proved himself quite unlike the rest of the crowd. Of course, all repented their disobedience to the master as soon as they regained their composures. But Ali's remorse used to be very singular. One evening, at the impulse of the moment, Ali openly rebelled against the master, but the following morning, his pillow was found actually drenched with tears of repentance and remorse. Nay, the night watchman reported that Ali did not sleep at all that night. But the master had to suffer no less than his little lovers through this disheartening gap in the workings. Besides hours of botheration in explaining and bringing round these boys, he also had to put up patiently with their rough behavior, with the result that his well-worn black coat made out of a rough blanket called kamli, which is the only one that His Holiness is pleased to use since 1922, was torn to shreds and had to be repatched at so many places, since he did not and does not think it necessary to change it to this day. While once these crack lovers, in their enthusiasm, accidentally overturned the master's
Sorry.
these crack lovers, I know, in their enthusiasm, accidentally overturned the master's rickshaw when giving him a ride to their heart's delight, whereby causing many a scratch and abrasion to the master's already weak and frail person due to the prolonged fasting. This reaction itself, besides whatever other reasons the master might have had, justifies the necessity of splitting the Meher Ashram into two separate sections, as was done on the 25th of March, 1928. The lovesick and the other promising boys were isolated from the rest. And since formed the new division, aptly named the Prem Ashram, or the Abode of Love. The only difference between these two sections of the Meher Ashram is in certain details only. For example, the quarters of the Prem Ashram is next to the master's seat, whereas the Meher Ashram proper is some distance away from it. Again, the Prem Ashramites are governed by special rules which allow them to occupy themselves in divine contemplation most of the time. But all the same, they are made to pay the necessary attention to their physical well-being and secular education. While a certain period in the evening, I don't see anything else. While a certain period in the evening is fixed for their daily recreation, when they, like the rest of the ashramites, enjoy outdoor games, or whenever circumstances allow, go for a walk with the master himself. In spite of these special privileges and close contact of the master, on the 25th of April, 1928, the reaction amongst the boys went so high that the master had actually to threaten the Premi, loving boys, with a close-up of the Prem Ashram, and even some active steps were taken towards merging the same. Anyway, I don't know what that was. And even actual steps were taken towards merging the same into the Meher Ashram proper. But eventually they were pardoned by the master with a serious warning after one and all of them had bitterly wept regarding their unruly conduct. Sorry.
Thanks so much, Joy. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Marvin, please.
Can I just, that word close is close up, closing the ashram, not close up.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Chapter 14, Two Masters Meet. This and the following two chapters may perhaps appear irrelevant to the reader, but since we are trying to read the mysteries of the heart through the intellect alone, there is no help for it. To explain the so-called irrelevancies to the highest reach of the intellect is a work of volumes, but to avoid them totally is like presenting a body without a soul. The soul, or that mysterious something in man, whose presence or absence makes him appear as alive or dead, is a thing of mere theistical conjecture for the most of us. But just because we cannot understand as we ought to, and as well as we all shall have to, this essential side of human existence, we do not eschew the rest as irrelevant. There are thousands who think they know or understand Shakespeare thoroughly, while in fact they only talk of the material or intellectual side of Shakespeare, barring the few that know what Shakespeare really was. Even Shakespeare did not know himself fully, and through one of the master's stray hints, I can say, does not know it to this day, wherever he may be. The world at large is trying to read the book of life from the wrong end, but this is quite a separate subject by itself. To cut it short, the reader would do well to form his own sequence for this strange narrative as it suits his fancy and faculty, leaving out the irrelevancies to be enjoyed by those who understand them. With these introductory words, I would commence narrating the event that forms the heading of this chapter. Two masters meet. Just as the right moment, when the reactionary feelings were widely rampant, as if to comfort the impatient little lovers like Ali, the master of the master herself turned up at Mehrabad. Her Holiness Hazrat Babajan of Pune, who holds India-wide reputation and prominence, and who is one of the two masters of the master, paid a visit to Mehrabad on the 1st of April, 1928. It is rightly remembered as a red-letter day at Mehrabad. Hazrat Babajan had been staying at Pune for the last 25 years, but for the frequent drives around the city cantonment and the suburbs of Pune, she has never been reported to have left that place during all these years. And for the first time that Her Holiness was pleased to go out to visit, to quote her own words, the place of my child. A week prior to this all-important event, the master had received a letter from one of his disciples at Pune to the effect that Her Holiness was constantly remembering Ahmednagar and referring to her child, and perhaps may come down one of these days. Yet no one was prepared for this great, pleasant, and inspiring surprise. It had never before happened in the master's short but already eventful history that either of his great gurus had ever condescended to pay him the unique distinction and privilege of a visit in person. To the best of my information, a God-realized master coming all the way to his or her perfect pupil's place is perhaps unparalleled in the spiritual history of the world. At about 11:30 that morning, a car came sweeping along the road and stopped just by the Hazrat Babajan High School. Hazrat Babajan graced that car. Send a chit to my child soon, end quote, were the simple words that Hazrat Babajan let out on arrival. but they were enough to send a thrill of miracle into those who knew the circumstances prevailing then at Mehrabad. Since the master had imprisoned himself over the hill near the Mayhem ashram, a practice had come into vogue to announce visitors before allowing them direct access, allowing them direct to the master's presence. And this used to be done through printed slips, specially got ready for this purpose, according to the following specimen. And we have an example of it. On this slip, the name of the visitor, the place he or she hailed from, the duration of the proposed stay, and the purpose of the visit used to be scribbled in short and forwarded to the master for further instructions by the Mehrabad superintendent or the one acting for him at that time. Mr. F.N. Driver, better known as Padri, one of the master's earliest and trusted disciples, happened to be the acting superintendent on this occasion. His keen sense of humor caused him to act quite literally to the great master's command, and he just noted down Hazrat Babajan from Pune on one of these slips, and at once forwarded the same to the master. The effect that this slip, when it reached the master, caused among those present there was dramatic. Many were speechless, with mixed feelings of pleasure and wonder, and some looked staring blankly, as if trying to make sure whether it was only a dream or an actual reality. But none forgot to remember the peculiar action of the master that very morning, which now showed that at least he was quite prepared for this happy event. Probably the same moment that Hazrat Babajan left Pune at about 15 minutes past 8 that morning, the master here at Mehrabad left using his sandals for the first time and began to go about barefooted. On receipt of the message, the master at once hurried down the hill without using the then inevitable rickshaw, but stopped on the other side of the railway line, which divided the boundaries of the Meher Ashram and Mehrabad proper, about 50 yards from the spot where Babajan's car was stopping, and ordered all the boys and disciples to pay their long due respects and love to his own master. The master kept standing all the time that Hazrat Babajan was pleased to stop there. In the course of many remarks and discussions that the master had with the disciples after the departure of Hazrat Babajan, he also conveyed, "This is the most eventful day of my career, and I would like to add, eventful career." I would remark here that by way of paying a return visit, the master went to Pune the very next day when those who accompanied him had not to go a long way for paying their respects to Hazrat Babajan, as she was already present near her usual bun garden seat that morning. Thus, after a very long time, the master had left Mehrabad bodily for an outstation, a move that proved a forerunner to his contemplated change from Abhinagar described in chapter 15.
Thanks, Marv. Betty, please, could you unmute?
Just a fortnight after this memorable visit, let's see, sorry, I've got a, what can I do here? Oh, yeah, I need just a little bit smaller if you could. Just a fortnight after this memorable visit of Hazrat Babajan, thank you, the fasting that the master had continued without a break from the 10th of November 1927, just before setting the Meher Ashram all aflame with love, was now tightened and heightened with additional self-imposed restrictions from the 15th of April 1928. However, this intensifying of his apparent asceticism soon proved to be the last flickering of the dying lamp that goes out with a bold flame. Within a few days, the master began to let out hints that if a certain number of persons offered to remain on fast for a certain period, he might reconsider his decision of remaining without food. This was enough to set the disciples, and especially those attached to him through inborn love, to bestir themselves into action. Mr. K.J. Dastur took the lead and soon succeeded in making him come to definite terms. 200 persons should observe a fast for 24 hours, and then I will take food, dictated the master. Accordingly, on the 25th of April, 200 persons remained completely without food, save water and tea without milk, for 24 hours. The master too followed suit and only took a few sips of the same tea that day. The fast terminated on the morning of the 25th, but the master would not take food. Let me serve you all first with the food, then I will partake of it myself, were the noble words that His Holiness conveyed in an unconcerned matter-of-fact tone. It was about 9 in the morning that for the first time after 5 months and 15 days, he took a few morsels of solid food, curry and rice. Gosh, remarkable. The transference to Toka. Shall I continue?
Yes, please.
Those often quoted and most significant words of the Master, "It will all have to be done afresh," did convey some very drastic change of affairs to many of his disciples. Yet no one amongst them thought at the time that even the surroundings will have to be changed, and that a fresh site for the Meher Ashram was necessary, until the Master took them by surprise one fine morning on the 7th of May, 1928. Amongst the visitors to the Master that day was one Mr. Abdullah Harun Jaffer, a furniture merchant and estate agent of Pune. In the course of his stray talk with the Master, the gentleman suggested the chance of a bargain of a fine site at Pune in a certain locality, which he said would make an ideal site for the Meher Ashram. It was a bolt from the blue for those present, when the Master readily fell in with the suggestion and conveyed, "Yes, I would like to change the site now." Those who have come sufficiently in contact with the Master know what his mere word means against costs and consequences. One would even think twice before changing one's residence in the same city. But for the Master, his apparently offhand remark in connection with the changing of the whole colony of about 400 souls from one station to another tended to make it a certain fact. Preparations to enable the Master to have a personal look at the suggested site were immediately set on foot. As if the spell of a fixed stay was broken with the recent visit of Hazrat Babajan, the following day, 8th of May, His Holiness set out for Pune at about 4:30 in the morning. Besides the apparent reason of looking up the proposed site, the visit proved a very significant one. Hazrat Abdullah, the Chota Baba, who was so far kept all aloof and isolated since he became enlightened, was for the first time taken out on this trip to Pune, while that very morning Hazrat Babajan started from the other end and re-inspired Mehrabad with her august presence. For the second time, it was as if the two masters had exchanged their respective positions for a few hours.
Thanks, Betty. Let's see. Ernie, can you unmute, please, and continue?
let's see, we're at during the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. During the time the master inspected the site at Pune, Hazrat Babajan blessed the boys and disciples at Meherabad with pats and caresses, especially to those afflicted ones who were feeling ill at ease through the master's short absence. On their respective return journeys, both masters started almost simultaneously from the two opposite ends, since the two cars crossed each other just halfway between Pune and Abhidnagar. The site at Pune did not appeal to the master, yet shifting the Meher ashram from its present surroundings, he conveyed, is imperative now after the old man's Babajan's second visit. Navsari in Gujarat, Daman in Portuguese India, and Singad, the famous fort of Shivaja near Pune, were the three spots that came under discussion as the probable places where the institution may be shifted. On the 15th of May at 4:30 a.m., the master left Meherabad to visit the proposed sites in a motor car driven by R.K. Arani, who had since returned from England. The next chapter contains the result of Mr. Arani's visit to England. The party went straight to Singad Fort and inspected the site there that its owner, Khan Bahadur B.D. Padamaji, had recently been generous enough in placing at the master's entire disposal. But it did not meet with His Holiness's fancy, mainly for these two reasons: the very heavy rainfall at the place and the inconvenience of climbing the great height for the parents and guardians of the boys who may come to see them. Otherwise, conveyed the master with a wistful look around the beautiful surroundings, this is an ideal place. It is my old place. From Singad, the party went straight to Bombay to catch the Gujarat mail, but they arrived there 3 hours too late. We won't go now, conveyed the master. Let Chandji, F.H. Dadachandji, proceed to Gujarat in the morning and report. We shall return to Meherabad tomorrow. And accordingly, the master set out for the return journey the following noon. By the time the party began to ascend the famous Bor Ghat between Kampoli and Kandala, it was nearing sunset, and the fine scenery of the towering hills was at its best. The sturdy car, Hudson Super 6, had so far stood the strain of so many miles, well, save for a slight relaxation in the pulling power of her 6-cylinder engine since the beginning of the return journey from Bombay. But as it was still going on merrily, Mr. R.K. Arani did not care to look up the slightly sputtering engine and let it go on at top speed over the Ghats, where unexpectedly he soon had to put it in second speed. Even this was found insufficient after some time, and the engine had to be put in the first speed. The powerful 6-seater car, with an overload of about 10 persons, with their baggage and baggages, somehow managed to climb the Ghats almost halfway, but here it suddenly slackened and then stopped for a moment. And before anybody could think what to do, it began to roll back. The situation was one of touch and go. Just a few yards, and there was a yawning chasm below. The car continued rolling back For all the attempts of Mr. Arani to stop it by pressing the foot brake, which also was found in disorder. Of course, there was a handbrake, but in the excitement of the moment, Mr. Arani forgot to use it, and I very much doubt if it could have averted the impending calamity at that critical stage, considering the heavy load of the vehicle, even if it had been brought into use. The situation became simply hopeless, and the difference between life and horrible death was a mere inches. Two or three of the party managed to jump out, but the rest, including the master, had to remain in the car to face the situation. However, at the right moment, the master simply leaned on one side of the car, pressed it down with his hand, and lo, it stopped dead there and then.
Beautiful. Thanks, Ern. Marianne, please unmute. Continue.
I have to pass at this moment because of my screen. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. Mahu, please. Got to unmute first, Mahu.
There are certain people who think the sign of the miracle as imperative in a perfect master, and it is simply for such of them that I have gone out of my way in giving prominence to this incident, as well as to others of the kind. Otherwise, my constant company with the master has confirmed me in that school of thought to which Qureshi belonged. Quote, a saint would be none the less a saint. A saint would be nonetheless a saint, says Qureshi, if no miracles were wrought by him in this world. If no miracle were wrought by him in this world. End quote. To come to the point again, the party climbed the remaining ghost party on foot and partly in the car in small numbers by turns. But between Telegon and Shalardwai, about 20 miles from Pune, the car went through another ordeal. This time, it was due to a huge tree that was lying across the road, invisible in the dim highlights of the car. But with a crash and a lurch, and the splintering noise of the glass screen that went into small bits, the car came out safe and sound. It was only when they had safely come out of this death trap that the party realized what a close shave it was. On the contrary, none of the occupants got as much as a scratch, while the engine went on humming and spinning merrily, enabling the car to cover the remaining miles with the Venegams. But then the party reached the railway station at Pune. They saw in the bright light of the station lamps to what extent the car had been damaged. Besides the broken glass screen, the mud guards and radiator bonnet were badly twisted, while the fine radiator crest had disappeared completely. Immediately after the radiator was refilled and the party had some refreshments, the master ordered the journey to be resumed in the dead of the night. Thus, within 48 hours of the start, at daybreak on the 17th of May, the master was back at Mehrabad. Still, he would think of no rest till the question of the new site was decided. Discussions about the same continued when someone suggested the name of Toka. The moment he heard about the possibility of an ideal site there, without any consideration for the physical fatigue of the last exertion, the master left Mehrabad again the same evening for Toka, a village at a distance of about 50 miles from Mehrabad. Simply at a cursory glance of the site, the master not only approved Toka, but the very next day set all the external machinery at his command into motion in acquiring the necessary land for the whole of the colony of Mehrabad, which was to be shifted there. Arrange the details soon was one of his commands to the Mehrabad authorities, so that we can shift there before the monsoon sets in. The way the master and disciples worked day and night, and the speed with which the whole of the Mehrabad encampment was removed is a story by itself. Suffice it to say here that simultaneously with the unmaking of the camp at Arangan, the new Mehrabad was in the making at Toka. So there was no wonder that within 15 days of the approval, on the 3rd of June 1928, not only the whole colony was completely transferred to Toka, but almost from the very day the normal life and the daily routine was also resumed there. And very soon, the one-time thorny, uneven and barren jungle-like place was transformed into a fine and ideal colony. Whatever vital reasons, I lost my thing. Okay. Whatever vital reasons he might have for this dramatic and costly transference, the hurried selection of the site by the master appears significant from many viewpoints. The half-sleeping village of Toka, situated midway between the historical and mystical cities of the Deccan, viz. Ahmednagar and Aurangabad, is very poor in material progress. The only sign of modern civilization about its rustic surroundings is the solitary little red post box that hangs by one of the half-broken village gates. But on the other hand, the place is exceptionally rich in its picturesque and charming scenery, situated as it is on the junction of two rivers, Godavari and Pravra. Godavari and Pravra. The grand bathing ghats along the Godavari, with numerous flights of stairs and bath seats, arcades and balustrades, whisper history to one in a contemplative mood. To one in a contemplative mood. Toka and the junction of Godavari and Prava owing to their unique situation, are recognized by the Hindus as the Allahabad and the Ganges of the Deccan, respectively. But since the railways have shortened the distance to the original Ganges, and brought within reach of all many other places of pilgrimage, Toka has lost its one-time popularity. It is worthwhile remembering here that Swami Ramdas and Hazrat Sai Baba of Shirdi, both of whom bear a close spiritual connection with the Master, passed a good time of their lives in the vicinity of Toka.
Thank you, Mahu. Anybody who's not on screen wish to read? Elizabeth, Rolf?
Yeah, I can read.
Awesome.
Chapter 16, The Mission to the West. We already know that Mr. R.K. Irani left Bombay for England on the 10th of March, 1928. One of his letters received from London on the 14th of April conveyed a very disappointing picture. He had found that even amongst the poorer classes of England, the careers of the youngsters were pre-settled by their parents, unlike that of an Indian boy, who is generally educated without any prearranged plan in the early stages of his education, and thus is easily available for any kind of training. Then naturally he found that it was a country where Maya ruled supreme and materialistic ideas held sway. And those who talked of spirituality generally meant psychic phenomena or discussed the subjects of divine illumination, God realization, truth, experience, as lightly as one would do geometry and geography, without knowing that those terms were not only possible to be talked over, but the spirit underlying them could actually be realized, experienced, seen, heard, and felt. In short, for all its brilliant streets, well-decorated shops, and vast and magnificent network of railways, etc., Mr. Irani found it through experience what he so far used to hear, that Europe was comparatively very poor in the matter of spirituality in its real sense. And consequently, no wonder he found the disseminating of truth spade work there. The cable received from him on the 16th of April at Mehrabad said, quote, "Some success, task difficult," end quote. While a subsequent letter contained a reference to a certain inconvenience. It was therefore finally decided to call Mr. Irani without going to other countries on the continent, as was originally arranged. It was therefore finally decided to recall Mr. Irani without going to other countries on the continent, as was originally arranged, and the following cable was dispatched, quote, "Don't bring boys, return," end quote. In the meantime, Mr. Irani had met with an 11th hour success and had almost arranged to bring some boys. But in face of this order, he postponed his scheme and, leaving instructions to local agents, returned to India. After his return, he succeeded in getting the master's sanction to call those boys and even arrange for their passage. But eventually, they were not allowed to come. The West had failed to respond to the divine call, so far as it concerned the sending of the boys to the Meher Ashram. Since bringing the boys for the Meher Ashram was apparently the all-important purpose of the mission, it can be said to have proved a failure. But the following incident shows that it was not so. On the contrary, when political India was shouting itself hoarse with "Simon, go back," and "Simon, welcome," no, Simon, Simon go back and Simon welcome. When many political representatives of India had found it necessary, quote, in the interest of their health, and quote, to stay in England, the solitary representative of spiritual India was silently doing his work, though himself unconscious of its real significance at the time, and even often being ridiculed for the peculiar life he led, since throughout the voyage and his stay in England, Mr. Irani had been ordered to remain only on bread, butter, and tea. In the darkest hour of his disappointment in England, Mr. Irani one day received a peculiar message. On the face of it, it was an ordinary letter under the signature of a certain Mr. X coming from Portsmouth. But the peculiarity was about its contents. The writer mysteriously acknowledged the receipt of Mr. Irani's message and invited him for an interview. With all his wits about him, he could not remember even having seen or heard any of Mr. X, not to speak of sending a message to him during his short stay in England. He naturally thought it to be a postal mistake, and went to all the Iranis that he knew of in London at the time, but none came forward to own the mysterious message. He thereafter went to Portsmouth according to the address given in the letter at the appointed time. It was Mrs. X who greeted him at the place and assured him that he was expected, and said that Mr. X had gone to the station for the purpose of receiving him. Nay, she even left him all to himself and went out to call back her husband so that Mr. Irani might not have to wait long. And he had not to remain in suspense for long, as Mr. X soon walked in and introduced himself. After the usual formalities were over, the gentleman dimmed the light and began to talk as if he were exchanging messages on a wireless apparatus, although he had nothing of the sort about him. In a low and impressive tone, Mr. X began to thrill his already stupefied listener with the following words, quote, "I see the master. It's 2:00 in the morning in India now." Here he exactly described the master's seat near the Meher Ashram. Other Eastern masters of his, Meher Baba's, stage are not easily accessible and don't like to be disturbed at such an hour. But he seems to be of a very loving nature. I have just told the master that ... will not allow the boys to be taken to India. But the master replies, there is no power on earth that can come in his way. He is not very keen about getting the boys. He wants to lay the spiritual cable between the East and the West. Up to now, the East is looked after by the Eastern masters and the West by Western masters. He wants to join both these sections, and that is the reason why he sent you, Irani, here. You are carrying with you, without your knowledge, a sort of wireless connection, and it affects all those whom you meet, end quote. Mr. X and the master have not seen each other in the ordinary way to this day.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Marion, are you able to read now? Yeah, good.
Yes, yes.
Eugene, can I ask at this point, is Mr. Irani, is that Rustam? Is that Adi's brother?
Got me hanging.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Thanks, Marvin. I was wondering the same thing, Betty.
Yeah, Rostam had a special connection with England. Amazing.
Do you know why, Mahu?
I don't know why, because I don't know his past life.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Marion, please.
History repeated. Within 10 days of the transference to Toka, The master commenced conveying hints about reverting to fasting and self-imprisonment as before. While pending the erection of new premises for Prem Ashram, the inmates of this section used to be lodged in a separate hall adjoining the Meher Ashram proper, some distance away from the master's seat. However, it was on the 1st of July that refanning of the flame of love began, as on that day, the spiritual classes that had during the past 2 months been postponed, sine die, were reopened for the Meher Ashram boys. On the 5th of July, the master actually remained confined to his box-like seat by the Duni and partook of nothing save water for the next 24 hours. But the very next day, he came out and began taking food as usual, conveying, quote, "This spot is not suitable for the purpose," end quote. Of course, the lovesick boys, who were greatly reassured with the near approach of the moment for the, quote, "final touch," showed great concern at the unexpected coming out of retirement of the master, who, however, restored their confidence with the following words, quote, "Don't be impatient. You won't be able to digest it so soon. I will surely make you the envy of all," end quote. But within the next 24 hours, he proved that besides the spot being unsuitable, there were other reasons for his unexpected visit.
I'm seeing exit, but
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me repeat that sentence. But within the next 24 hours, he proved that besides the spot being unsuitable, there were other reasons for his unexpected exit. History repeated. On the 7th of July, 1928, quite suddenly, as a jack-in-the-box, none other than Ali's father once again cropped up at Meherabad with a pretty fine yarn. He said he had recently heard in Bombay that the master had absconded and all the ashram boys had gone raving mad. But the very sight of the progressive state of affairs at Toka was enough to set his fears at rest, and it did not take long for the ashram authorities to give him complete satisfaction, and he returned to Bombay at ease the following day, after seeing his son quite sane and safe. From this time onward, the master once again began to get all absorbed in the affairs of the little ones. Not only the Prem Ashram boys, but all the rest were begun to be impressed with spirituality in various ways. The beginning of August witnessed almost a craze for divine contemplation amongst them. Leaving aside the lovelorn boys, many in the Meher Ashram too were reported to be getting up voluntarily hours before the morning bell and sitting for meditation. Some of them even rose as early as 1 o'clock in the morning and sat unmoved and quite engrossed in contemplation of the master. Just in the thick of the revival of this spiritual atmosphere, Ali's father all of a sudden presented himself at Toka for the second time. Nay, he was once again on the warpath. Quote, "I want to take Ali with me," end quote, was the same old song on his lips. Since he had already caused enough trouble to the Meher Ashram and its authorities, and had on more than one occasion gone back on his word of honor, he naturally felt ashamed to ask for Ali's withdrawal directly. Quote, "I want to take the boy home for a few days and will bring him back soon," end quote, he said. But the authorities compelled him through logical objections to come to the point, and leave off the tricks. While thus disposed, he could make no secret of his having been influenced by a certain gentleman, whom I shall call here Mr. J. This J had stayed at Meherabad before this for nearly a year, and enjoyed the master's hospitality, and taken full advantage of the HBH school during this long period when he used to behave like a great devotee of the master. I remember clearly, as early as the month of April, 1928, in the course of some discussion, the master had conveyed, quote, "This J is not what he appears. He will prove a traitor," end quote. Then why did the master not dismiss him that very moment? It's a question that would naturally crop up in the mind of a critic. But there are many more of its kind. For instance, quote, "Why the master, who is possessed of powers supernatural, did not stop the devil's work itself," or "Why, for all his wisdom and foresight, the Almighty did not nip the Satan in the bud, instead of creating the sorry business of continuing an eternal duel with the devil through saints and prophets." Then again, quote, "Was Christ the all-knowing master really unaware of the serpent in the grass, Judas, when he kept him near as one of his special disciples?" End quote. I'm sure the coming man, be it Imam Mahdi, the second Christ, son of Zoroaster, Kalanki Avatar, last Buddha, Superman of science and evolution, or the combination of them all, will explain all this soon to the world in words as well as in deeds. In the meantime, I will continue the narrative as it is without haggling over mere intellectual arguments.
Thanks, Marion. So we'll begin here next time.